Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, I got a fun and exciting video for you guys today because we're talking about Pilotwings 64 and its active decompilation project. That is because on the channel recently we've been going through some of the biggest big decomp energy out there, and everyone is always asking about Pilotwings 64. I think that's because the fact is, this is one of N64's most unique games, and because it was a launch title, people really do remember playing the ever-loving hell out of this. And even though every time people think about Nintendo, Pilotwings always comes up in conversation, you have to remember that Nintendo's made all of 3 games in this entire franchise: Pilotwings, Pilotwings 64, and the 3DS entry. So for a series that really is synonymous with Nintendo hardware and kind of pushing the technical limits, at least at the beginning, as to what that hardware could do, we don't actually get that many games as far as Pilotwings is concerned, and that's an absolute bummer. I want a new Pilotwings for Switch 2, basically taking the concept and doing everything it possibly can to modernize it and give us more Pilotwings fun. But in the meantime, obviously, N64 decomps, recomps, and PC ports are all the rage, and I like to say it's why retro gaming is making a comeback, giving you new and exciting ways to play some of your favorite classics. So just be aware that, like I like to remind you in the channel, anytime a decomp hits 100% status, that does not mean you're going to see a PC port anytime soon. My guess would be that someone is going to work on this relatively quickly, but 100% decompile just means you're back to the source code and assets. It does not mean that suddenly there's an executable you can double click and start playing on your PC today. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But I will leave a link to the GitHub repository for the decomp project, as well as decomp.dev, which basically tracks almost all of the active decompilation projects out there, but it doesn't cover 100% of them. And honestly, every time someone asks for a comprehensive list of decomps, recomps, and PC ports, they don't have one place to point you to that covers absolutely everything. It's one of those things, if you want to make that website, I think people would be very excited, and I will send you all the information I have for all of the different projects in development so you can kind of fill the site with that data. I just don't personally have the time or energy to do it. Keeping up with all these decomp projects in and of itself is a full-time job. But honestly, Pilotwings 64 is going to be an amazing candidate to get a PC port. But let's talk about the big news right now, and I'm sure you already understood it from the title of the video. Pilotwings 64 is now 100% fully decompiled. That means it is back to a usable source code that would recomp back to an N64 game that you could run on real hardware or an emulation. If we take a look at the heat map here, that's what I like to call it even though it isn't the name, every single module is 100% green, and that means everything has been 100% decompiled. Everything from how the graphics present to pulling the controllers to the gyrocopter here has its own sequence of data, and that has all been 100% decompiled. That means at this point in time, anyone can take that code and start to produce a PC port. And again, it could take a week, it could take a month, it could take a year, it could take 5 years for all we know. I don't want you guys to get too excited because I never promise any timelines on the channel. I just talk about the fact that now you could do something like this. But honestly, a PC port of Pilotwings 64 would be a ton of fun to start, but the mod ability would be absolutely insane, because if we're being entirely honest, Pilotwings 64 isn't the most feature-rich game on the N64 from Nintendo, but I would love to see a world in which you basically have something like Mario Maker, but for Pilotwings 64, the ability to play around with the overall level structure, create new levels and challenges, maybe even put new kind of vehicles in the game, so you can just kind of play around to your heart's content. I could see something like a Pilotwings 64 PC port basically being a sandbox building game where you can kind of do anything you want. Now the other thing is, the frame rate in Pilotwings 64, not the fastest thing in the world, and when Nintendo brought this over to NSO, actually running it at a faster frame rate but with the wrong frame pacing, controlling some of the vehicles, mostly the actual wings that you wear and flap around in, became way more difficult than it should have been. That would definitely be something that a PC port could fix up and give you a higher frame rate without making the game quote-unquote harder to play. Let's do the first 2 soundtrack sample just because the music in this game is incredible. I'll be right back with a lot more news. I mean, honestly, the soundtrack of Pilotwings 64 sounds like something that was just basically cut from the movie Boogie Nights. It has that 70s jazzy soundtrack, and it just 100% works in the context of what the game is trying to present you. But back to the visuals of this in and of itself, the thing that put it over the top for 100% decompiled status here, you'll see 8 hours ago, are some of the graphic effect states. And that is because the N64, like basically any other piece of hardware, has a ton of different functions and calls it can do to its hardware as far as presenting an image on screen. We talked about that a lot in the Mr. FPJ N64 core development, and you see it on the Analog 3D N64 console as well. The VI pipeline has a bunch of different things it can do to the image, and it seems like one of the last things to get decompiled was a visual effect, which is not at all surprising if you know how the N64 hardware really does work. But as we go through the game here again, running at stock speeds, you will see that this is definitely not getting anywhere near 60 frames a second, not even really persisting at 30 frames a second for its entire runtime. And when Nintendo ported this to NSO, yes, it ran at 60 frames per second, but the replays would get absolutely out of sync, and again, some of the frame pacing was an issue. And when you have input windows, especially in the flying with the birdwing section, if you can't actually get your input in correctly because that frame pacing changes back and forth, it can make the game extremely hard to actually play. That is something I feel like could be fixed up a lot easier in a PC port than Nintendo's NSO implementation. Because don't get me wrong, I appreciate that Nintendo does port these things to modern consoles, but honestly for the most part the NSO version of an N64 game is probably foundationally the worst way to play that game compared to emulation, FPGA, or any of the recomps or PC ports. And you're just going to keep seeing these things happening more and more, and even in something like the Twilight Princess PC port coming, that's another game that runs at 30 frames per second that can be made to run faster, but needs to be made to run faster correctly. It's not just one of those things, you don't just basically jam your foot on the gas pedal of the frame rate and hope for the best. If the game's logic is tied to something like its frame rate, you have to adjust things around to make sure it works. Or in the instance of Pilotwings 64, you have to make sure that the frame pacing is correct for those scenarios in which the input window matters. If you ever watch speedruns or you listen to people talk about speedrunning or even fighting games or anything else, they talk about frame timings and basically frame perfect accurate inputs. That means that if you need to do something very specific, you need to be able to do it on the same frame every time. And if that window keeps adjusting itself back and forth because the frame pacing isn't persistent, that can mean a very difficult playing experience. And that is again hopefully something that a PC port could clean up. But the biggest thing is, again, and I know I'm just talking about what could happen, not what guaranteed to happen, is just more Pilotwings 64, because this is absolutely an amazing game. It really sold the overall 3D aspect of N64, but it really doesn't take all that long to play through the entirety of what it has to offer, and then kind of want more. Pilotwings 64 always left me wanting a sequel on N64 that we never got, so maybe in the future you'll have a ton of different levels out there, maybe even creator support online where you can kind of just pick a new Pilotwings 64 course and play around. One more soundtrack sample and I'll be right back with more. So yeah, we now live in a world where Pilotwings 64 has been 100% decompiled. That's absolutely a world I want to live in. And it is again one of those things, we'll just have to wait and see how long it takes for a PC port to start development. It might be done by the same group that's decompiling it, it might be done by a completely different group. We've seen both things happen as far as N64 decomps are concerned. And it might take years like the Paper Mario decomp took to start getting an active PC port, but that one really has a much messier, much more complex code base. So honestly, I feel like that's kind of the reason it took some time for anyone to really want to take that on. But Pilotwings 64 just is one of those games. When you played it back in the day, if you did around the launch window of N64, you absolutely realized the promise of true 3D was at home with you. This and Mario 64 basically told you that the N64 was doing things that were absolutely unseen in the home market as far as Nintendo was concerned. But I just want more Pilotwings 64, and if I could take a long shot thing as to what I would actually love to see out of a potential PC port, I would love to see VR support in Pilotwings 64. I think it's the perfect game for it. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me if you could snap your fingers and make one PC port from N64 game library show up right now. Which one would it be? Sure, that we're done. We're going to hit the bullseye. Big thanks to Kilter Music for helping with the capture. And I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.